Well, Chag Sameach to all of you. I have a handout. No, the sermon is not this long. Don't worry. But I do have a handout. So I emailed Rabbi Harris earlier this week, and I said, how many copies should I make? And he said, well, 75 would be more than enough. So I made 74 copies. And if they're not enough, blame Rabbi Harris. And if there are too many copies, blame Rabbi Harris also for that. Hey, I know the rabbinate, so I wanted to study with you this morning some texts related to the Haggadah, specifically related to the question of drinking wine at the Seder. You ask any Hebrew school kid, any younger kid, any Sunday school kid, how many cups of wine do we have at the Seder? And they say 4 cups, so everybody knows that. But why do we have wine at the Seder? And why do we have 4 cups of the Seder? Why is 4 the operative number? And while we're speaking about why do we have this or that at the Seder, why do we have charoset at the Seder? And what's the story about charoset? So let's jump in. On page 1 of the handout, you have 2 passages from what's called Tannaitic literature. The first is from the Mishnah that was written down around the year 200 or 220 of the Common Era. And the second one on that first page is from the Tosefta, which is basically Tannaitic statements which didn't find their way into the Mishnah. When Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was editing the Mishnah, he couldn't include everything because that's what good editors do. They take out this and that. But there was another collection of Tannaitic statements called the Tosefta. So we have a Mishnah text and a Tosefta text on the first page. The first text, the Mishnah, tells us that on the day before Pesach, that's yesterday, before the day of the first Seder, from around the time of Mincha, around the time of the afternoon sacrifice, one should not eat until nightfall. Now this, by the way, is not the fast of the firstborn, which either you do the day before Pesach or you go to a siyum to get out of the obligation for that day only. No, this is not that fast. And as far as I am aware, this is a fast that's really not particularly observed, although the afternoon of the first Seder, we're running around so much, making arrangements in so many cases, that we don't have time to eat a whole lot. But evidently it was customary to eat from sometime in the afternoon, just a couple of hours, just a few hours until nightfall, presumably to build up an appetite for the Seder. Then the Mishnah goes on, even the poorest Jew should not eat until he sits down for the Seder, and they should give him no less than 4 cups of wine, and even if it's provided from the community soup kitchen. So everybody gets 4 cups of wine, and lest you think that it's a luxury that only people of reasonable means or extensive means should have. No, even a poor person, even a person who is dependent on the community soup kitchen should be provided with 4 cups of wine for the Seder. And now the Tosefta is going to flesh that out even more by telling us that it's a mitzvah to rejoice and to cause one's children and the members of one's household to rejoice. Bameh misamchan, how do we rejoice? Biyayin, with wine. And when you think about it, of course, we have wine at every happy Jewish occasion. We have wine at a wedding and at a baby naming and at every Yontif. And of course, at the Seder, not 1 cup of wine, but 4 cups of wine. And of course, every Shabbos, because why? Because of the symbolism. As it is written in Psalm 104, V'yayin yisamach levav enosh. Wine gladdens the hearts of people. It's the joy of the symbolism of wine that is significant, okay? And then the Tosefta goes on at the top of page 2. Rabbi Yeshua says that this applies to women and children as is appropriate for them. You might think that women are not obligated to join in the drinking of 4 cups of wine at the Seder because according to the Mishnah, women were exempt from positive time-bound mitzvot, and this is one of those thou shalts. You fulfill it by drinking the wine, and there are time parameters, there are rules about the times. So lest you think that women, who in Mishnaic times were exempted from positive time-bound mitzvot, no, this is one of the ones that women are included in, and children as well. Children have no mitzvah obligations. You didn't just hear that. And don't tell your younger children and younger grandchildren, but technically speaking, children don't have mitzvah obligations, and yet children should be included in drinking the 4 cups maybe 4 smaller cups, maybe grape juice instead of wine. But women and children and men and even the poor people, as we saw in the Mishnah above, should be included in this celebratory part of the Seder, namely drinking 4 cups of wine. But why 4? Now that we've established that everyone's supposed to have wine at the Seder and that the symbolism is about joy, why 4 cups? And so the Talmud Yerushalmi, and as the footnote tells you, let's see there, in footnote 6 tells you this was compiled in the middle of the 5th century. This passage begins by asking the question, Minayin la'arba'a kosod? Where do we get the notion that we should have 4 cups, not 7? And we have all these emblematic numbers in Judaism. There's 3, there's 7, even larger numbers. No one's advocating 40 cups of wine, but 40 days and nights and 40 years in the desert and so on. So the Talmud asks, why 4 cups? So we're going to depending on how you count this, there are either 4 or 5, or there are numerous explanations. So the first one is from Rabbi Yochanan, who said in the name of Rabbi Benaiah, that it corresponds to the 4 promises of redemption that we read about before the Exodus itself. And in the Haggadah of my youth, the Silverman Haggadah, which maybe many of you used at least until the conservative Haggadah, the new one, published in the mid-1980s, the so-called new one. But the one from my childhood, and maybe many of yours as well, had this explanation for the 4 cups. And when we went around the Seder, when we were teenagers, and we would try to make sure that it was my mom's turn to read this passage, and then my sister and I, whose Hebrew was a little bit better than my mom's at the time, we would almost gleefully listen to her breaking her teeth on these words, v'hotzeti, v'hitzalti, v'ga'alti, v'lakachti, and we felt so superior since we knew more Hebrew than she did. But we were wrong. It's not v'hotzeti, v'hitzalti, v'ga'alti, v'lakachti. It's v'hotzeti, v'hitzalti, v'ga'alti, v'lakachti. Yes, in Hebrew, and especially in biblical Hebrew, putting the emphasis on the wrong syllable can change the meaning of a phrase. And so v'hotzeti means, and I took you out. And v'hotzeti means, I will take you out, which is God's promise. I will take you out from the land of Egypt, etc. So these 4 promises, and you can see the full verses in the footnotes, these 4 promises that God made to the Israelites before bringing the Israelites out of Egypt, that's why we have 4 cups and not some other numbers. Okay, the next, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi on the bottom of the page, starting with line 8, tells us that this corresponds to the 4 cups of wine mentioned in reference to Pharaoh. What 4 cups of wine mentioned in reference to Pharaoh? At the top of page 3, we see those passages, and the full verses are in the footnotes. What's this all about? This is the story of the cupbearer, right? And he's telling his dream to Joseph. What does that have to do with Pesach? Well, the end of this dream, Joseph's interpretation of the dream, leads to, in this case, the liberation of the cupbearer, and eventually it'll lead to the liberation of Joseph himself. So there's a liberation theme. It's not exactly Yetziat Mitzrayim, it's not exactly the Exodus from Egypt, but a cup is mentioned 4 times in this story, and this is a liberation story. The next explanation here in line 14, Rabbi Levi says this refers to the 4 kingdoms. What 4 kingdoms? Look in footnote 14. 4 of the empires who tried to control the Jews, exile the Jews, destroy the Jews. This is not a complete list. This doesn't include the Nazis, for example, and so on. But in ancient times, these were the 4 empires that had tried to harm us, to destroy us. And so the sages say that this corresponds to the 4 cups of retribution that God will give to those evil nations and the world to drink. And so we see those verses at the top of page 4. Let's see, the first one is a verse from Jeremiah. Take this cup of wine, this cup of wrath. Line 20 mentions Babylon, a cup in God's hand, and there's a cup in Adonai's hand. And so we have these verses that talk about cups, but not the nice kind of cup, like a cup of celebratory wine, but these cups of retribution that God is going to force our enemies one day to drink. So 4 other cups, and of course it is one of the themes of Pesach, right? They're the Israelites who were liberated, and there were the Egyptians who enslaved them and oppressed them. And so 4 cups for our enemy, 4 cups of retribution for our enemies, another 4. And then finally, the corresponding to them in line 26 and 27 and beyond, 4 also refers to or symbolizes the 4 cups of consolation that God will give the Jews to drink one day. At the top of page 5, we see those verses. Adonai is my allotted share and my portion. There's 1 kos, 1 cup. At least in the Hebrew, the word kosi, my cup, is there in the Hebrew original. We have kosi in line 29 in that verse. We know this psalm. We might know it primarily from funerals, but the 23rd Psalm does mention kosi v'rvayah, my cup overflows with gratitude toward God. And then the 3rd verse says kos yeshuot. Well, wait a minute. There's only 1 kos there. Right, the cup of deliverance, but the word yeshuot is plural, so that counts as 2. All right, it's a bit of a stretch, but there we have 4 cups, sort of, 4 cups of consolation that God will have us drink in consolation for our previous suffering. So a lot of different 4 explanations. You decide which is the one that resonates more in you. And if you didn't share it last night or in the past, share one of these 4s with the rest of the people you're at Seder tonight, or maybe your own list of 4 other symbolisms that you can think of. Now let's move on to charoset. I got to tell you, I'm a traditionalist, and as far as I'm concerned, charoset is apples and chopped up walnuts and a little bit of cinnamon and a little bit of wine, and you got charoset. I'm not one of those people who goes for dates and figs and. Yeah, I know. Dates and figs and goo and who knows what. But look what the Gemara is saying, right?
Don't provoke the Torah.
I know. I this is a dangerous part of my presentation. So what is the Mishnah? So now we go back to the Mishnah. What does the Mishnah say? They bring before him matzah and bitter herbs and charoset, even though the eating of a charoset is not a mitzvah. But Rabbi Elazar ben Sadok says, yeah, eating charoset is a mitzvah. By the way, in this context, they don't mean a mitzvah like we're going to say a bracha, asher kedeshanu mitzvah v'tzivanu al achilat charoset. We don't say that. So the term mitzvah is used here to mean it's obligatory. It's not just custom, it is obligatory. It's a mitzvah to eat maror, right? We can find the biblical verses for that. And we say that bracha, thank you, God, for commanding us to eat maror. And it is a mitzvah to eat matzah, but it isn't a mitzvah, strictly speaking, to eat charoset. But it is an obligation, says Rabbi Elazar ben Sadok. So eating charoset is a mitzvah no less than all the other ritual foods. But why is it a mitzvah? All the Mishnah did was say, yes, it is. Rabbi Elazar ben Sadok says, yes, we're obligated to eat charoset. Not just it's nice, it's fun, it's a tasty part of the Seder. No, it's an obligation. But why? So the Gemara, the Talmud on page 6 tells us, or begins by asking the question, my mitzvah? Why is it a mitzvah? How do we know that it's a mitzvah? Rabbi Levi Omer, Rabbi Levi says it's a remembrance of the apple tree. The apple tree, under which, look at footnote 30, under which the Israelite women gave birth. Rashi cites a midrash that reports that despite the Egyptian forced separation of Israelite husbands and wives, the Israelites remained fruitful, right? The Egyptians were trying to limit Israelite population, well, second, at least chronologically, by killing the Israelite baby boys, if they were discovered, but first, at least chronologically, by separating the Israelite husbands and wives. If the husbands and wives can't get together, that's going to have an impact on population growth. And so, according to the Midrash, God made it possible for the Israelites to be made fruitful. And what's the proof text? Here from Shir HaShirim, Tachat HaTapuach Orarticha, under the apple tree I roused you. So there's a certain sort of romantic symbolism here. Don't sit under the apple tree with anyone else but me. We all remember right, as we slogged through World War II, we remember that song, which actually came from the 1930s. It was a hit in some Broadway play, right? But sitting under an apple tree has a romantic connotation in American culture and here in traditional Jewish culture as well. And so there's a romantic piece as well. God made it possible, to speak euphemistically, God made it possible for Israelite husbands and Israelite wives to make more Israelite babies. But the other symbolism of the charoset is what you and I all learned in Hebrew school. Rabbi Yochanan says it's in remembrance of the mortar, which the Israelite slaves used to make bricks. So Abaye says, therefore, we have to make it acrid and we have to make it thick. In other words, you have to have enough apples in it. If you want to add prunes and I don't know what, and dates and figs and pomegranate seeds and all that stuff, that's fine. But you got to have apples in it. Why? Because of the symbolism of the apple tree. You have to make it acrid in remembrance of the apple tree, and you have to make it thick in remembrance of the mortar, and that's it. And Rabbi Yochanan has another explanation. So what's going on with these explanations? I shared with you some Tannaitic sources and then some Amoraic sources, some Talmudic sources, which were later. The Tannaitic sources, remember when the Mishnah was written down in the beginning or the middle of the 3rd century. We were living then under the thumb of Rome still, just trying to get by. I mean, the temple had been destroyed in 70. That's not all that much earlier. And the Hadrianic persecutions in the 130s. So here in 200 or 220, things were still very difficult for Jews. And just getting by, just establishing what the rule is. Yeah, you got to have 4 cups of wine. Just do it. Yeah, you got to have a charoset. Just make it and eat it, and let's get through the Seder. But by the time you get to the Talmudic sources, they are explorations of meaning, explorations of symbolism. In the Tannaitic period, we were just hanging on, just getting by in terms of Jewish observance. By the time the Talmud Yerushalmi was compiled in around 450, well, the Romans read Wikipedia. They knew that the Roman Empire crumbled in 467, so they knew they only had 17 years. So the Romans had other things on their mind, so maybe they were oppressing the Jews in Israel a little bit less. And certainly 100 years later, when the Babylonian Talmud was compiled, things, of course, were a lot easier for the Jews in Babylonia. So in this latter period, we had the luxury to interpret, to search for meaning. So which model of Jewish life do we want to make for ourselves? Do we want to just go through the motions of the observance, just hang on? Let's get those 4 cups of wine poured and drunk. Let's not worry about explanations or symbolisms. Let's just eat the charoset. Yeah, we can fight about Sephardic or Ashkenazic charoset recipes, but no time to talk about symbolism and so on. Is that the kind of Jewish life we want to do? Just get through it and do it and don't think about it and don't question it? Obviously not. And so not only at the Sedarim are we encouraged to ask questions and to bring answers and to create new questions and to create new answers, and that really is our mandate throughout our lives as Jews as well. So you may share some of these explanations with your fellow participants at your Sedarim, and if this has stimulated you to think of your own new questions and new answers, that's even better. So we always wish one another Chag Sameach on Yontif and Chag Kasher v'Sameach on Pesach. And I wish you that, Chag Kasher v'Sameach, a happy holiday and a kosher holiday, but a meaningful holiday and a thought-provoking and feeling-provoking holiday as well.